Thanks, Pippa. Kia ora iti pukapuka whānau no kaparia ho ko Tanya Ashcroft tōku ingoa. And it really is a privilege to be amongst you all celebrating 21 years of the Writers Walk. And a special welcome to our guests Fiona and Elizabeth. Bit of feedback, sorry guys. And they're going to talk about the creation, history and future of this wonderful Wellington institution and the part they've played in making the walk the much loved success that it is. So we're going to start with a question with Fiona. I love the line from your verse, "This is not a straight town at all," and no it is not, and can I just say I'm very glad that it is not. Could you please read that for us, the text from your installation?
Yes, indeed. So this is the text of the writers on my Writers Walk sculpture. Although I was involved in the first sculptures in quite a big way, the second one, when the committee was planning it, I expected to be on that committee, and I was excluded. They didn't actually want me to come, and I was desperately offended. As it turned out, they were actually plotting to do one for me, which was absolutely lovely and wonderful. And they chose Barbara Murison chose the text, and this is the text that is on the sculpture. This town of ours kind of flattened across the creases of an imaginary map, a touch of parchment surrealism here. No wonder the lights are wavering all over the place tonight, not a straight town at all. So no, I mean, when I wrote that, the reference to the straight town, of course, was about all our crooked highways and byways, because what the poem comes from is a long sequence of mine called Speaking with My Grandmothers. I live up above Cook Strait, looking out over the strait, and one night I started to write this very long sequence, which was about my grandparents arriving, my great-great-grandparents arriving on the Oriental in 1840. And it brings up a lot of mixed emotions about how those journeys are perceived now, which I do understand. But I often think about the courage that my grandmother had, my great-great-grandmother, Elizabeth Sutherland, had to step aboard that ship on the other side of the world and come to New Zealand. And so this is about what she saw, and this is about me looking back and reflecting on that journey. There's a great family story, a myth or legend, if you like, about her getting on board that ship. She was the ship was about to leave, and she was standing on the wharf back in Scotland, holding her infant child. She didn't want to get on the ship, but Alex Sutherland, my great-great-grandfather, went down the gangplank, seized the little baby from her arms, and went back on board the ship. She had but one choice, which was to come to Wellington, which she did. And on the way, as she was coming into Wellington Heads, the second baby was born. And so I think back of her resourcefulness, her courage, whatever it was that it took to be a settler in Wellington. And I'm just going to read before I hand over to Elizabeth, the second part of that text, it's actually towards the end of it, and it's about thinking about the various things which have led to me thinking whether it's a straight town or whether it's a straight history or whatever it is. All the same, grandmother, how many hills are there left to stand on? Because I tell you, it's getting quite lonely on this high moral ground. And now that I've found your guilty secrets and all, I can't keep away, can't stop looking at your picture on the wall, can't stay away from the green field I've found up the line where sheep may safely graze. Between each tombstone, private people in private graves. I always mean to bring bunches of flowers, but they end up time and again rusty hydrangeas plucked from the side of the road to lay on slabs stretching in perfect line, grandmother by grandmother, all the way back to those ships. Thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. It's lovely to hear more of the poem and read, of course, by the author. It's just fantastic. Now, Elizabeth, you were part of the fourth wave of installations in 2013. Could you read your work out to us and also tell us about the time and place, perhaps the window view that inspired it?
The peculiar thing to me when my part of the Wellington Writers Walk, which I actually avoid. Oh, sorry. The peculiar thing to me when I walk past my part of the Wellington Writers Walk sculpture, which I avoid doing because I don't want to be seen looking at my own part of the Wellington Writers Walk sculpture. Sorry. Skulk. Oh, it's raining heavily and I have my hood up. I'll stand here for a moment and contemplate it. Anyway, the weird thing is that you can't see the thing that it talks about from where it is, though it faces the water. But of course that would have been impossible. So the quote comes from a passage in which I am sitting in the window seat of the bay window in my flat at 76A Kelburn Parade, which was where I flatted when I was at university, and I'm looking out at Pencarrow Head, or down on Te Aro Flat. So I'll read you the whole passage. I liked to sit on the wide sill of the bay window in the lounge and watch our shadow, the shadow of the hill our house was on the wrong side of, slowly stretch out over Te Aro Flat. The evening light concentrated till the city and the topped up trembling horizon beyond Pencarrow Head would begin to look like a seaport in someone else's lost paradise. The clear apple juice light was like that in paintings by Giovanni Bellini, where all things are equally intricate, foreground and background, in the same ideal focus, as if seen by their inventor, a god who knows what is going on, both near at hand and far away. I'd sit there, absent-mindedly packing paper into a breezy gap in the sash window, and dream about my imaginary world, a world I shared with a sister who also shared my room. Since Ailsa, who was my sister's first girlfriend, or perhaps since the coming out group the year before, Sarah and I had spent less time there, the room and the imaginary world. Perhaps for Sarah our world had receded, but for me it was still near, there, pushed up against the glass, like something preserved in a staining spiritus medium. Wellington, on a clear August evening, was the port of Delbin or Topiora in its cold summer, until finally the first appearance of the high voltage silver pulse of the Pencarrow light would wake me up to where I was in fact, Wellington, a city I loved so much that like a child uncertain of its parents' favour, I couldn't look at it straight on.
Tempting to ask for more and more readings because it's just so enjoyable.
So the thing is about that is I guess that it's several things. That it's basically got the two strands of my writing going on in here, which is the autobiographical stuff, of which there is less than the imagined stuff, and I have spent a lot of time in the autobiographical stuff talking about why I write about made-up places. Sort of wrestling with that because of, various slights and accusations thrown my way rather than praises, as you do when you're kind of been brought up by the kind of parents I had. And of course I've realised, since I've been writing my memoir, that it has a lot more to do with kind of roadblocks in my personal life, because my essays are almost always entirely personal. So there were just things that if I set out on various roads, I would eventually hit that block, and I wasn't going to be able to use my life to write novels. So my biggest Wellington novel is Glamour in the Sea, which has my father in it at the age of 21 as a character, and it's set in 1947, and it's very, very Wellington, but it's not me. I sometimes jump in and say authorial things, but it's not me.
Elizabeth, you touched on place there. That was one of my questions, and because I know that place is important in both of your works, and yet often the work that you both write is not set in Wellington. It's sometimes not even in the world quite as we know it. So I just wondered if living in Wellington nonetheless influences the things you choose to write about or the timbre of your work in some way.
Wellington influences me in the sense that it's a place where I feel that it's my place to stand. I've lived on the same hill now for 53 years, and it gives me a sense of identity, really. And I sometimes wonder how that is. And just to touch briefly back on the history of my family, my mother's family arriving here, maybe there's something that I identify with, but I lived in quite a lot of places when I was a young person, and my parents shifted around and we lived in different places in Northland. I tend to go back to that early Northland environment quite a lot, or I did for a long time in my writing, because it was vivid and it was clear, and I didn't live there anymore, which is always a help. Probably I don't write about Wellington quite as a specific place quite as much as the sense that it gives me of belonging. When I came to live in Wellington and where I live looking out over Cook Strait. I look back all the way around. I live on a cliff top. I look all the way back across to Soames Island, and the lights of going to the hut beyond it, and that's very stunning. But I think that I also quite like the sense that it gives me of just being alone there on the hill, and so it's more what the place. It gives me a great deal of personal comfort and identity. I think I'm coming towards writing about it more now as I get older. I don't know quite why. Maybe it's simply time to leave the north behind me.
Wellington gets in various ways, but I think the way that it's clear to me in my writing is that the fact of living in and around Wellington and almost always living on a hill with a domestic view, apart from in Parramatta where we had a slice of Parramatta Harbour looking towards the hills above Pauatahanui. But the rest of my time I've been up on a hill looking out at other houses, and I think that Wellington's views, where you can look into other people's lives, are actually quite formative of the psychology of anyone writing there, that there's always proximity to, you can't forget that people do things differently. You can't forget that everybody has their own stuff going on. There's a whole lot of kind of like just ingrained moral viewpoint in living in a city where you're looking out upon other people's houses. And I've thought about that several times. Fiona looks south, I look north, so she sees the interesting weather that you can actually see coming, like armies. Whereas the weather that I see, you can't see it coming. It just kind of like arrives, usually preceded by nasty wind, and then so that makes a difference. The place that I write about all the time, of course, either in disguise or straight out, is Golden Bay, where we have a section and are going to be building a house. So I've spent 40 years wanting to live in Golden Bay, and I'm bloody well going to get there over everybody's dead body. Yeah. So.
Well, it's a special part of the world down there in Golden Bay, absolutely. Now, Fiona, you were on the original committee which came into being in 2000. Can you tell us about its inception, how the team got the words off the page and onto the ground?
I was at the New Zealand Society of Authors meeting one night it must have been around about 1999, and we were trying to think of something special to do, I think, to mark 2000. And Barbara Murison and I said almost in the same breath, what about a Wellington Writers Walk? And everybody said, what a fantastic idea. How will we do it? And we immediately started sifting through ideas. Earlis Hunter was there that night, and she'd just been in Sydney and walked around Circular Quay, where there is a lovely writers' walk. And she said, well, let's do something different and interesting the way that they do in Sydney. So one thing sort of led to another, really, and she knew the designer Catherine Griffiths. And Catherine suggested that we do concrete sculptures. Now, this was a huge, scary thing for us to do, and they were quite expensive. I mean, for the times, there was quite a lot of money that was needed to be raised for each one. I think, I don't think I'm talking out of turn or any secrets here. I think each one required about $11,000 to build. And so we then thought, well, goodness, how are we going to do that? And I was very upfront in those days. I wouldn't go around asking people for money the way I did then, but I was shameless. So we went around and we just said to people, we want to build these, they're going to be different, they're going to be wonderful, and they're going to make a statement for Wellington. And so that's what we did. And I was bowled over by the generosity of some of the people that I talked to. I mean, there was a particular businessman in an advertising agency, and I went in, I think I can say this, Peter Biggs he said, oh, fine, can I have James K. Baxter? And I said, well, I guess, yes, you probably could. Do you think you could pay for one? He said, yes, of course I will. He said, I'll do that, and the agency will do another one. I think it was Pat Lawler, I can't exactly remember. And he talked about another person who perhaps probably should remain nameless, but he said, look, I'll go down and ask old so-and-so, he said, and tell him that I've given you a couple. And so I did. And he said, oh, okay, Biggsy's done that, has he? All right, I'd better do one too. And so it went on, and it was this marvellous sense of it just rolling on. People really wanted to do it. I think that the vision, I mean, we were all a little bit taken aback, I think, by the sculpture idea at the beginning. It just did seem such a big thing. But this enthusiasm that carried us along. But the trouble was that as soon as we thought of one, we'd said, well, we'll start off with just 3 or 4 and raise money for those. I think there were 11, and I'm sorry, I got that figure wrong. I think each one cost 7,000, but there were 11 in the end that we kept saying, we must add so-and-so, we must add so-and-so. And so it just grew and grew, and that was the beginning of it. And it was a marvellous thing, and I always remember the day that we launched them. Dame Sylvia Cartwright was the Governor-General at the time, and she generously agreed to come along and open all of them with us. So it went on.
What a wonderful achievement, and I love the stories of collecting the funding. That's fantastic. Now, Elizabeth, can you tell us about the day your work was unveiled and anything else that sticks in your mind about working with the team to get that far?
Oh, okay. So, well, I remember the day of the unveiling well, because I was just sort of, wandering around with a group of people who were a mixed group, but I knew so many of them, because this is the beauty of the Wellington writing community, that it was Alistair Campbell and Joy Cowley and James McNeish and me on that day. So, families were there, and I can remember that Jack decided he liked the Joy Cowley one best because it was situated right where he and his first girlfriend had used to go and sit in under on the rocks under one of the wharf things when they were meeting, her coming from Wellington Girls and him from Wellington Boys, Wellington College. and they were 15, but there was a building overlooking it where her father worked, so that's why they had to go underneath, and I was looking at it saying, wow, dank young love. I can remember that. And I can remember that we had a really nice knees up at Joy's afterwards. Yeah, that was really good. And yeah, and it was a sort of a sunny day that suddenly turned into a blustery, murky day. Yeah, so that was all very Wellington. I knew Catherine when she was doing those back at the beginning. Yeah, so I remember her talking about the technical difficulties of working in concrete to get those incredibly sharp edges. And like it wasn't easy. And they were amazing. That first lot is so striking. They're great. And then, Bill's in that first lot. And
That's right,
I think Bill's is possibly still my favourite, though I keep kind of like having debates because I like all of them, but
The edge of the universe, like everybody else.
Also, because it's just so pithy and it just sort of sits there going like, there's a thought, Yeah.
Well, that takes me back to the day that we launched the first lot, the first group of them. And I remember one of the significant things that happened that day was that the James K. Baxter one is located in the pool outside of Te Papa, and John Baxter, his son, leapt in and on top of it and started splashing around. And Cheryl Sutherland, who was in charge of Te Papa at the time, tried to physically remove him from the pond, and it all got really heated and really very excited and fun. And I read in the Listener in an article that Michelle Leggett did just a couple of weeks ago. Obviously she had been there that day because she recalls the whole thing of John Baxter splashing around on top of his father's words. Yeah.
It's the slightly broken one, so we could blame John.
But it's probably I saw the Maori Jesus.
Yeah, it's probably that's right. It's probably the sea though, but it's quite impressive. I think time and possibly John have sort of improved it by making some of the letters wonky. Like it's just an interesting variation. So we'll say that, shall we? Yeah. Yeah.
I have to say too that this feels a bit skitey really, but I actually chose 5 of the first texts, so which I've always had a great pleasure in. I chose Loris Edmonds, she was my very dear friend, and the whole thing about us Wellington being the city of the verb seems so apt. I mean, it's not surprising that it's been taken up as a sort of mantra for this town, because it is an active city. It is. We do bustle around in it, and I think you asked before about being in Wellington. Well, that whole sense of the wind and us moving quickly through the city streets, that is how we are. So I love that. I love Bill's. I chose the Glover one, and that one does not seem to have been so affected by water because it's right on the edge of the sea.
Sort of elevated.
Elevated. I chose Vincent O'Sullivan's.
It's a great one, that
It's
one.
a great one because we're different here. So it's the poet in the poem in the text is talking to a grandchild.
Shall I read it out
yes,
quickly?
Do
Yes.
it right now.
Then it's Wellington we're coming to. It's time, she says, it's time surely for us to change lanes, change tongues. They speak so differently down here.
Yes, and then one that I love, which I also chose, was Bruce Mason's, which tends to get a bit forgotten, and it gets all sorts of rubbish sort of collected in it. And from time to time, I think I must go and do something about Bruce's, because it's right at the edge of Circa Theatre. I can't remember the text off the top of my head for that. Have we got that? Yeah, but it's about being an audience, and it's set into the pavement, quite low down. I had to really really look for that one. Yeah.
Some of them are a little mystery. We were talking about that a bit earlier, which is part of the fun as well, finding it.
So yeah, I think I was too distracted by the very clear water yesterday, and I was looking for stingrays, so I think I might have walked past it, but then I went back checking, and I couldn't find it, so I don't know. It's there. It's not under that big Wellington that everyone poses for photographs. I have to go back.
From time to time, that some have been lifted out for repairs. I don't know whether that's still the case, but I know that Wellington City Council and Nicola Young have been very good about looking after it, and we appreciate that. At some stage, of course, the style of the sculptures changed. And
Twice, really.
yes.
So there's the big concrete letters, and then there's more really like stonemasonry ones, like the Robin Hyde one.
Oh, I love the Robin
The
Hyde.
woman who was in a state of crisis, who was curled up leaning against it yesterday, which I thought was very appropriate with Robin Hyde. Poor young woman. But she wouldn't have been comfortable leaning on the other ones, whereas they're flatter. They're kind of flatter. And then you get to the metal letters on timber, which my one is. Metal letters inset into timber. Yeah.
And very stylish they are too. I wanted them to stay the same, but I guess one has to accept new styles, and they're very, very attractive and lovely too. I do find them a little bit harder to find, but then that may be because I've been associated with the concrete ones from the beginning. So, yeah.
Because they're in most of them are in relatively high traffic places. You find them by just they're suddenly under your feet, which I quite like. My ones, it only gets people coming down, from beside Kumatoto stream. That's pretty much where it is, and it's kind of. It's interesting because it's quite far away from all the rest of them, which I like. It's like, here I am. I can call myself an outlier.
Well, so could Barbara Anderson, because did you go to hers yesterday?
No, I didn't. But yes, she's way the hell around.
Way over the far end of Oriental Parade.
Yeah, which was her stamping ground for the last bit of her life.
You're the next one down from Barbara, so between the two of you, you're sort of at the trailblazing end of the Writers Walk path. Think of your respective sculptures. There are areas in between where we might imagine there are places for some new installations. I was interested to know what sort of writers and writing you would both like to see celebrated along the walk in the future.
I think we definitely need something from poet James Brown about riding bikes in Wellington. Yeah, though usually it's about his, argy-bargy with motorists on the island road to Island Bay, but you could probably find something. I think he'd be pretty good. Yep, and Ashley Young. I do like the poets. Get the poets in. Yep.
We have quite a few Māori and Pacifica writers these days, and perhaps that was not so evident 21 years ago. I think perhaps our representation could perhaps be a bit wider. So I can't specifically think of somebody off the top of my head who I think should be there, but I think maybe there is a need to, Patricia Grace is there, and
Tusiata lived here for ages, so it would be great to have Tusiata.
Yeah.
She's immensely quotable.
And Whitty has lived here for quite long periods of his life, so I'd quite like to see them represented.
We touched on this before about the form of the sculptures, and Fiona, you said you didn't quite like it when they changed, but the world is changing and at pace, and there's technology, and there's perhaps different forms that we could look at in the future. Have you got any ideas about what shapes and forms the sculptures could take going forward?
Obviously, I'm going to say that it has to be robots accosting people, and like someone from the Ancient Mariner, and then quoting poetry at them. Obviously, it has to be poetry. Yeah.
A bit of AI.
Yeah, a bit of AI, but like AI with robot body. I mean, I really don't know about the new technology. I have always loved the sort of heads-up display with the rippling. The lights that have words on them. They're quite fun when they do put literary quotes up on those. I've seen those various places, or projections. We don't have anything like, how they project different things on the on the Sydney Opera House because it makes such a great canvas. We should probably look around for more places to project light onto things and have things change all the time, so that you can have several months of some writer and then several months of another, which isn't quite as the same as having a permanent fixture, but I don't know. It will be nice. It will be good looking.
I put myself in the hands of designers. My strengths are probably looking at the words rather than how they're presented. So I think the designers have done a wonderful job.
Now, here's my shortest question, but I don't think it'll be a short answer. Why do you both write?
To do with my life so far, and the chances are getting shorter. Why do I write? Do you want to go first?
I think you just gave the perfect answer. I mean, we're like the planes that have set off, on a long haul flight, and we are basically past the point of no return. Well past the point of no return. There's nothing else we can do with our lives. I'm unfit for any other kind of life. So at this point, I love writing. I love writing to entertain myself. I like writing the autobiographical stuff in that I am, as Joe Bennett said about his memoir in the newspaper today, it gives me a chance to put things down, as in put them down on paper, but also to take them off me and lay them down, my sword and shield. Down it goes. Actually, I keep my sword, I think, yeah. So that, but also for the rest of it, the imaginative works, I just really like writing books that make me laugh and cry and entertain me and keep me intrigued. So, I mean, I'm just entertaining myself.
Perhaps that's a fantastic answer. I love it. I guess if I could go back to my childhood, I was an only child who lived, and I've told this story probably before, so forgive me if you've heard it, but it is about why I write. I was an only child. I lived in a fairly solitary way with my parents in the country. And when I was 6, I didn't start school till I was 6, and then I fell ill. And so I had to go to hospital for quite a long period of time. I don't know, it seemed very long at the time. It was probably only about 6 weeks or so. But anyway, I was stuck in this country hospital. My parents were 20 miles away and they didn't have a car, so I didn't get to see them very much at all. In fact, I think I saw my mother only once in those 6 weeks. But a visiting teacher came around and said, "Oh, you're six, are you? Oh, well, you know how to read and write." And I said, "Well, no, I don't." And she said, "Oh, that's terrible. I mean, you're 6. And I said, "Well, I've just only been to school for a wee while." "Oh, dear me." Well, she said, "You'd better learn. We'll have to teach you how to read this afternoon." So she spent, a couple of hours paying special attention to me, and that was great. So I learned to read because that's what she wanted me to do that afternoon. I learned to read, and I went and got some books out of the little dusty hospital library at the end of the corridor, and she came back and the following week and she said, "Oh, very good. You've read those books?" Yes, I have." "Oh, well," she said, "we better teach you to write this afternoon." and so she said, "What would you like to do?" I said, "I need to write a letter to my parents because I knew that you got letters and things." And she said, "Oh, okay, what do you want to write?" And I said, "Hello, dear. Come and visit me. You can stand here if you like." So anyway, I said, "Well, I want to write to my mother and father and tell them to come and get me." And so we wrote this pathetic letter saying, "I don't like the food here and I want to see my cat," and so forth. And she wrote on an envelope and off it went. And what happened was that 2 days later, they had fast postal delivery in those days. 2 days later, my parents appeared and took me home. And I thought then, writing works. And that's what I've thought all the rest of my life.
It's true. Yes, that's very true. It's such a great story.
Well, unfortunately, we haven't got through all our questions, and I think we could talk for a lot longer, but we are running out of time, and I did wonder if some of you may have some questions that you'd like to ask Fiona or Elizabeth about their work or the walk. So,
Just a little bit more about the change in style. Was it driven by economics, or was there a stylistic reason for giving up the sculptured concrete look?
Well, Dawn Sanders is here in the audience, and I know that Dawn had some strong feelings about it, and because you were part of it, maybe we could call on Dawn to answer that.
The reality was that we were also getting gaming trust money, and if any of you know about gaming trusts, you have to have 2 quotes, comparative quotes. There'd also been quite a bit of problem with a lot of the proud letters being knocked off and broken, and because we'd gifted them to the council, they had to keep on replacing them. And so they were keen that we had other options offered as well. And so that was why we put it out basically to tender. And we had the offers from Catherine, of course, again, and from Fiona. And Fiona's came out more favourable because there was a team called TAG, who were the advisory panel for the waterfront. And we had to play the balls with them as well, so that it was actually considered by lots of different parties. And Fiona's did come out a bit more cheaply and favoured by some of the other people as well. So that was basically why.
thank you, Dawn. I'd like to thank both Elizabeth and Fiona so much for sharing your stories and your wonderful anecdotes. It's been a total pleasure. And I'd also like to thank everyone else here who's had a part in the history of the Writers' Walk.